Jemi rikthyer në studio, i ftuar është Ambasadori i Bashkimit Evropian në Shkup, zoti Dejvid. Mr. Ambassador, the Minister of Justice has many times now requested support from EU institutions in order to investigate the judicial cases he believes are deliberately staged and framed politically. What will the EU answer be on this, and can we expect EU team to investigate those cases?
I understand when there are judgments in cases which people are unhappy with, and the natural response to that is to say, well, let's get someone else in to have a look at them again. But the problem is this is a sovereign country. You have a judicial system in place which is responsible. It would be wrong for the European Union to step in and try and put our own judges or put our own people in to review cases and give our own judgment on it. That would be the invasion of the sovereignty of the country, and also would undermine the judicial system such as it is. What would then happen is that every time somebody was unhappy with a case, then there would be a demand for the European Union to step in and help. That's a kind of form of colonialism. So we can't do that. And you know, what would happen? Imagine just that we came in one case and we found something else. And then in a second case, we found something which people didn't like. Then they would very quickly turn and say, well, what is this foreign European Union doing judging in our cases? So justice has to belong to the country itself. It can't be for the European Union to step in and second-guess the judges. We do support, of course, as you know, the judicial reform. We do also follow particularly cases of high-level corruption. In a partnership with the OSCE, we have a project which looks at high-level corruption cases across the Western Balkans, but not so that we can second-guess what the judges have decided, but have a look and see how the criminal justice system is working, if there are weaknesses, if there are recommendations that we can make to improve the situation.
Mr. Ambassador, the opposition opposes the constitutional changes. Majority, on the other hand, does not have the needed votes in Parliament. Do you expect that the constitutional changes will happen until November, when the screening process is expected to finish? And do you think that for this issue we need a wider consensus from all political actors and not only votes in Parliament?
Well, I think it is important to have a public debate on these issues, and very soon the working group which is drafting the constitutional proposed changes will publish them, and at that point it will be important to have a discussion based on the text that is before them. And I think that will help people to really focus not on a huge range of issues which are worrying people at the moment, but what is actually in front of Parliament and the decisions that it needs to take. Concerning the constitutional changes, this is of course a sovereign decision for Parliament, it's a sovereign decision for this country, so it's not for me to say, how they should do it. Well, what I would say, and the comments I would make, are that I think that when the text comes out, when one looks at it, what we'll see is a text which is, in a way, making explicit what is already implicit within the Constitution, which is the express protection of people who self-identify as Bulgarian within the Constitution. The country will decide, but it does not seem to run against the national interests of the country or indeed in any way undermine its identity.
But VMRO DPMNE requires guarantees from EU that Bulgaria will not further block North Macedonia's EU path. And on the other hand, also insists that a better negotiation framework with EU can be reached. Can EU give such guarantees and deliver on those demands?
I mean, first of all, on the framework, I think it's only fair to be very clear. I do not see any circumstances in which a better framework can be negotiated. I followed the negotiations over 2 years, were very difficult. The compromise that was reached is not perfect. No compromise, by definition, can please everyone all the time. Nonetheless, it was a compromise which allowed the country to move forward and open negotiations. I do not see the circumstances in which it would be possible to renegotiate to change the balance of the compromise. Concerning the request for guarantees, and I understand this is because people often ask this, it's not just political parties. In all of the accession processes with different countries, Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, there is no guarantee that a country, a third country from the European Union, one of the 27 member states, will not block at some point. What I can say is that in this case, there is a commitment, I think, from the EU side that the focus should be on the implementation of reforms, because the way forward to the European Union is through reforms. So any block that may come has to be linked to the reforms and not to other issues such as touching on history or identity where there are concerns. So are there guarantees? No, there are not guarantees in any process, but we, from our experience of the past, where you see countries who've joined who've had to face very serious issues, including with their neighbours, think of Croatia and Italy and a number of others as well. What we've seen is that over time, as the process advances and as confidence is built, so these issues of vetoes start to fall away, and really the focus is on reform and moving forward and making the steps necessary to join the EU as soon as possible.
Albanian political parties also want to replace the so-called 20% for ethnic communities in the constitution. Do we seem to not have the same urge, but the others do? They insist this issue to be solved, which, as you know, is related to many other issues in the country, as for example the implementation of the law of languages, the balancer about the employment of the ethnic communities in public administration, and so on. So what's your comment on this?
This country has a good record of inter-ethnic relations, and in fact it's one of its strong assets, which has been built up since the Ohrid Framework Agreement. So of course we in the European Union want to see those relations consolidated. How you go about that, the ways in which you do it, the laws that you have, the practices that you have, provided they're in line with European standards, we wouldn't comment on. It's really a matter for the country itself and the different communities to come together and discuss and determine for themselves, provided they always follow the standards of the European Union.
Okay, and Mr. Ambassador, what do we lose as a country if we do not start the negotiations with the EU on time in November?
We're in a remarkable moment where we have seen, partly as a result of Russia's war on Ukraine, we've seen a new momentum and seriousness and dynamic in enlargement, with offers of candidate status to Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and last year the opening of accession negotiations with North Macedonia and with Albania. So what you have at the moment is a sense of momentum. You've seen that the screening is going ahead and going well. We had the Frontex agreement, which was signed in Macedonian language. So you are seeing this momentum moving forward. There is an opportunity now to go forward decisively towards the European Union. It's very much in this country's hand. There is no one there to veto the next step, since the decision back in July was that it would move to the next step, which is an intergovernmental conference, provided the change to the constitution is made. That's a decision for here. So the first thing I would say is you have momentum. And what worries me is that if the country doesn't move forward now, then it's missing a huge opportunity for, I think, a decisive move forward. The second thing I would say is that, of course, even without the constitutional change, it's in your hands to carry out the reforms which would bring you closer to the European Union. But you would not then be in that process of negotiation. And that, I think, makes a huge difference, because these discussions are very detailed and they involve very clearly identifying the steps, the practical steps that need to be taken. And that's also extremely helpful at home, because once you are clear, once everyone is clear about what's needed to be done, then the political responsibility is there. So what you would lose, I think, is you would lose the huge opportunity that is there in your hands at the moment. The way forward is clear, it is practical, I think it's realistic and achievable, but of course it's finally a decision for the country to take.
And finally, Mr. Ambassador, government officials say that if we start the negotiations in November, that it will take only 7 years for Macedonia to gain its EU membership. Are you optimistic about these frames and deadlines?
We started the negotiations last July, so in November or when afterwards would be another stage in that process. Look, it all depends on the speed of reforms, and that's in your hands. And for that, there are a couple of things that are needed. I've said already, political determination. But most important, perhaps more important than anything, is you need the government and opposition to come together and to say, okay, we have differences about many issues. That's normal, that's healthy in a democracy. But we agree that on these core reforms, we're going to get together, whoever's in government in the future, and that's going to be our top priority to move forward. Now, if they can do that, then I think the future is very rosy indeed. But it's a very important development which is needed, and we've seen in other countries, such as Croatia, that this was absolutely key to delivering in quite a short time membership of the European Union.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you so much.
Shikues të nderuar, ju faleminderit që na ndoqët, bashkë miru pafshim.
Thank you.